Good afternoon, everyone. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I'm Manuela. I invest in early-stage startups creating a better food system. And I'm truly glad to be here with you today having this conversation about the future of the food that we all eat, so it's definitely something that we all here share in common. Key topic when we think about deep tech, but mostly when we think about the food system, we have to realize that it's still primarily broken today. On the one hand, we actually produce all the calories that we need to feed the world, and yet, depending on the data, but overall the number is about 2 billion people who either are facing food insecurity, meaning they don't get all the nourishment that they need at the severe or moderate level, or they are today overweight. And at the same time, when we think about sustainability, the food systems responsible for over 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. So definitely a lot of things to be fixed. But today we are here to talk about new advancements in areas like genetic or AI and how they're contributing, opening new opportunities for healthier and more sustainable food. I'm very, very excited to welcome for this conversation where we will discuss things like precision fermentation and the impact that it has, enabling the protein that humans need at scale, or the impact of GLP-1 and other weight management drugs, or even the great increase in access to data about health data and how it's enabling more precision nutrition. And for that, I'm glad to join this conversation with the three amazing speakers. We have Mariette Abrahams from Qina. We have Kate Bekers from MicroHarvest, and Ellie Morrow from Clay Capital. I would love for you to give them a very, very warm round of applause if you can, please. I just mentioned their names and organizations, so I would love maybe for you, before we jump straight into the conversation, to give a very brief intro about yourselves and tell me, or rather tell the entire audience here, one food tech innovation that you're quite fascinated about today. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to join the summit. My name is Mariette Abrahams. I'm the CEO and founder of Qina. We're a strategic nutrition innovation consultancy and platform operating in the area of personalized nutrition. And our mission is really to bridge the gap between science and solutions to help stakeholders to create better solutions that are rooted in the evidence and allow access to health information and tools for all. Oh, sorry. My AI innovation, my technology, sorry. So the technology that I'm really excited about, very excited but also scared at the same time, is AI, simply because we can see now the opportunities that AI presents in terms of connecting huge data sets, which will allow more targeted and personalized access to information to individuals, but also the production of new solutions that is leveraging AI.
Good. Hi everyone, I'm Kate. I'm co-founder and CEO of MicroHarvest. And we're almost 4-year-old startup based in Hamburg in Germany, focusing on the production of alternative protein ingredients. So sustainable alternatives that are very nutritious and also taste very good, that can replace our animal-based protein sources. What I'm very excited about is we use fermentation to do this. We grow microbes, and those microbes are a very good source of protein. And I'm really happy to see that fermentation is coming more and more at the forefront, also for new inventions for the food tech. Because we've been doing it for centuries. We did it before we even knew about it. But still, there's a lot of innovation and a lot that we can explore more. And I think we see more and more of that coming now, also the first steps into the market. So that's very exciting.
Hi, I'm Morrow, investor with Clay Capital. We are a food and ag tech firm. We've been around for about 10 years. We started in Singapore with a smaller first fund, and now our second fund is based out of Paris, London, and Singapore. We invest internationally across the food value chains. We typically say we invest from soil to gut, so is interested in soil microbes as the microbiome and everything in between. I'll cheat a little bit on sort of favorite innovation. I suppose the best innovation entering our category is really business models that are commercially intended, if not yet viable. And so the bringing together of how to go to market in such a way to create a sustainable business, but also bringing true innovation that's creating a more sustainable farming system as much as a healthier diet, that's really exciting.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the three of you. I forgot to mention, because I think around here we're lucky to start even a bit earlier. Maybe we'll have a couple of extra minutes at the end. Let's see if we'll be as lucky as that. But in any case, I want to invite you all to contribute to the panel as well. I, of course, prepared a good list of questions to all the three of you ladies here. But if you want to address your own question, you can send through the app, or else there is also a QR code, which I think might appear here at some point. So don't hesitate, scan it and send the questions, and I'll make sure to try to ask them before we close. But so that we can open conversation with one topic that I've been hearing more and more often, I think I might not be the only one. Even in very popular channels like Netflix and so on, we've been seeing series or presentations around longevity, like from Blue Horizon and Don't Die and whatnot and beyond. I think it's kind of a common concern. We are all lucky. Our generation is the one that lives the longest compared to all the ones that came before us. And now we start to see the link between what we eat and how long we live. I'm very curious to hear a little bit about your take, Mariette, because I know that you have a nutritional background as well. And how do you see this link between eating and living longer? And is there a more specific type of healthy diet? What is it composed of? Is it like the same for everyone, or is it not? Yeah, tell me a bit more.
Yes, so as you say, my background is in nutrition, and of course, a healthy diet, what that definition was like, has slightly shifted over the years. So when I was training, it was all about, the balanced meal plate, but now we know a little bit more. So from the recent studies have shown that if you follow a more plant-based diet, you can add about 8 to 13 years of healthy life to your health, to your life. And so that really is more pronounced if you start early. So that will add to your actual health span. What has changed, though, is what we understand about how people respond to different foods. So we know that the healthy diet for one person might not be the same as a healthy meal for another person. And that difference in response can be down to your genetics, it can be down to your environment that you live in, the lifestyle that you lead, the composition of your microbiome, your unique metabolic response. There's so many different areas that we are only starting to understand now, because now all the different disciplines are starting to come together and share data, and we're starting to understand that it's not just eat less or exercise more. It is actually looking at how does the information and the data that we have really respond to that individual. And then it's not just about the data that you have, it's then the behavioral aspect, as in who's going to actually act on that information. So even though I tell you that you should be doing this, are you actually going to eat? Because we know that most people do not meet their 5 fruit and veg a day, for example. Most people don't get their exercise quota in. And so how do we move people from just saying what a healthy diet is to actually doing it at the same time as well?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. But I assume that there are some sort of specific things that should be part of your plate, like proteins or micronutrients, macronutrients and things like that, or those,
Yeah, and this comes back to Michael Pollan, who said, eat less, mostly plants. And that is also, my philosophy that, you cannot enforce people to eat a specific diet. You need to eat them what they can afford, what they can manage to cook, and what's available also, and now we're taking more sustainability into consideration. But we're also seeing, maybe from a very meat-based to then moving to a very plant-based, burgers, for example, and now it's slightly moving back again. So we can see this, this shift in terms of consumer behavior that one style or one dietary pattern is not going to work for everyone. But overall, we can see adopting a more plant-based diet is definitely more beneficial for your health in the long term.
Fascinating. And I think it also responds a bit to what we were discussing here on the one health of humans, animals, and of course the planet. And maybe back to you, Kate, because I know that you were working on one specific aspect of the food that all of us also want to have in our plates very regularly, which is protein. But in particular, well, today it's not yet addressing human, it's getting there, if I understand it well. You'll tell us a bit more about it. But in any case, it's not just about whatever kind of protein, but also how, like the quality of this protein and the bioavailability. Tell us more how you're working on that and why is that even important?
Yes, sure. So you can have a diet with a lot of protein, but the protein that you eat also needs to be absorbed. This starts, of course, in your mouth, and you chew it, and it's partly degraded. But then in your intestine, it's your whole microbiome that arranges all that. So what's very important is that the protein that you have, it has the right composition, so the right amino acids, which is like the building blocks of protein. So some we can also make ourselves, some not. Those are the essential ones. So if you provide protein, it's very important that you have the right amino acids and the right composition of protein that you give someone. And then that protein needs to be absorbed very well. And this is, if you look purely at protein, when you switch from meat-based protein to plant protein, the amino acid composition is often not as good, depending on what plant you use. And also, plants protect themselves in nature from being eaten by having what we call anti-nutritional factors. So those are things that sort of inhibit digestion. So if you want to get protein out of plants, you really need to isolate the protein and get rid of all the anti-nutritional factors. The thing is that then you also remove a lot of vitamins and minerals and things like that. So the overall nutrition is then less. So it's definitely part of the solution, and it's actually the only alternative which is available at large scale. And I think what's very important is that we find a full solution that is available at scale, which is for a lot of new sources still very tricky. So this is what we are really focusing on by leveraging microbes, so the bacteria that you find in your yogurt and in your kimchi that you already eat very often. We can use those as a protein source, and there we don't need to extract the protein, so we can use all the vitamins and all the minerals that come with that as well. So that's what we are really focusing on. And indeed, we're developing this for human nutrition. But regulatory, it takes a while. So we're actually starting now with animal nutrition, also on pets. So if I think of food tech, it's just as much pet food tech. It's because it's really linked, because there's a lot of humanization going on. So also the whole health trend, this is very big in dog and cat nutrition as well as that it needs to be very tasty, because dogs and especially cats, you can say, okay, you need to have a very perfect diet, but if it doesn't taste good, they don't want to eat it. That's also definitely the case for cats and dogs, and they are even more difficult to convince. So it also needs to be very tasty, and this is also where we have the great solutions for.
Absolutely. I think we all like tasty food the best. But it's important to understand then that it also needs to be bioavailable, and there are a lot of other important elements that we sometimes might not consider when thinking about food. But now we're considering more and more elements, and so much so that, at least, Ali, you will confirm that, but in the VC world, we've been talking a lot about a new trend called food as medicine. As a way to really see the food as, we already talked about longevity, but in a bunch of different aspects, how what you eat can actually impact your health. But I remember when we were preparing this panel, Mariette, you were quite critical about this concept. So I'd love to hear a bit more from you. Like what's your position in regards to this trend? And in particular, do you think we are on the verge of really more explicitly seeing food as medicine?
Yes, so food as medicine, or food is medicine, is a concept that people understand. That's the bottom line. It's a concept whereby if you are sick or you have a chronic condition, then you can actually use food to then become healthier. But from most healthcare professionals, they would say, well, if you take a medicine, you are already sick. So therefore, food does not replace the medicine, but food can be used as a source of improving your health or be supportive as part of your health journey, for example. And so what we see in the industry right now is that food as medicine is used in two ways. The first way is that food as medicine is used for chronic diseases, and therefore you get a food script, for example. The doctor can tell you, go and pick up your script, and you can get a farmer's box. You can have meal kits prescribed. You can have access to a dietitian to do coaching, for example. And so that is on the one end of the spectrum for using food in terms of chronic diseases. However, food as medicine is also used in the context of prevention. Longevity, that area, which is on the other side, where people are saying, well, actually, I want to use food because I want to prevent the delay of, or delay the onset of dementia, for example, or I want to prevent my cholesterol from going up, or anything like, because we've got a family history of chronic disease. But these individuals are asymptomatic, so they don't have any symptoms. They have normal cholesterol levels, but they say, well, I'm following, or I want to do food as medicine. And actually, one investor report came out last year, and they were asking consumers, what are you interested in adopting? And it was paleo, intermittent fasting, keto, and food as medicine. And we are like, no. Food as medicine is not an intervention, and it's not a dietary pattern. And therefore, you cannot put that in the same category. You either use it as a way of managing your condition, or food is health. You are using it as a way to improve your health or optimize your health. And that's why we usually have an issue a little bit with the food as medicine.
So some caveat there with that concept. But I would love to hear from you, Ali, because I know that, again, in the VC world, it is an expression that we're using more and more. And curious on your take on it, and if it's something that you are also looking into with Clay. But beyond that, would you think that maybe one of the reasons why in the investment side of things, we are looking more and more at the food as medicine concept, might it be related to the economics between food and pharma, where, in food you have high volume and low price, whereas in pharma you would go for much lower volume and much higher price. So would it be a way for us to also kind of balance out the risk and reward equation or something like that?
Yeah, very contentious point, right? Fundamentally, the more you look at a pharma model, it's a pharma model, meaning that there's no off-ramp. So you're medicating life. You're using it as a crutch as such for alternatives such as lifestyle change, diet change, environmental issues that you're sort of being placed within. And so I think fundamentally the contention that you get to with this conversation is, what are we actually talking about? We're talking about chronic disease, and so to Marianne's point, when you have diabetes, obesity in the numbers that we do in Western society, clearly you need something to stem the tide that is much more of a systemic, medicated solution. And one of the ideas that I think is helpful framing is letting people win before they've won, i.e., stop the problem, let someone lose weight, create habit change, behavior change, an enabler. And then you want to see an off-ramp from that. But it depends on your premise, I suppose, as an investor. The idea of essentially a SaaS model, something that someone is a drug model addicted to for the course of their life, is a long-term customer. It's a reliable long-term customer, but it's also a pharmaceutical model whereby you're creating a reliance. And so from an impact standpoint, do we want to believe that diets and how we treat the food system is something that should be within that frame? I think we would argue that ideally there's a different approach with respect to how you think about healthy lifestyle. From an investment lens, this has always been the question of what inherently are you able to invest in with that in mind. The world of microbiome health, which has been everything from prebiotics, probiotics, I believe there's something else called like postbiotics or a range of biotics. They have, to Marietta's point again, different impacts on different people. It is inherently a personalized experience that there's no sort of silver bullet that applies to all of humans because there are other variables such as how you live your life, your genetics, how you spend your day, etc. There are the wearables. There's the world of 23andMe. All of these have kind of been different lines into the same question. And the question of is it investable inherently? And different topic, but not dissimilar to regenerative agriculture. I'm not sure you can you can't look directly at the sun, you have to go around. And so there are enablers to both of those topics, but I don't think, as far as we've seen so far, investing in food as medicine, conceptually interesting, not a direct approach.
Super interesting. And talking about a medicine, and you both, I think, mentioned obesity as being one of the key concerns, and it's true that a lot of people worldwide are dealing with that disease. But we're seeing a big emergence of weight management drugs today. Definitely a new trend that coming from the pharma world, but having a tremendous impact in the food industry. But I'd love to hear from you, like the three of you, whomever want to jump in first. What are the potential opportunities, that you see with that new trend?
So I'll start from the nutritional point of view because, of course, GLP-1 drugs, the onset of them it was kind of, we had COVID and then we had ChatGPT and then we had GLP-1. So it's kind of this huge wave that's come about. And not that it's new. I mean, the drugs have been around, being used for diabetes. It's only now that we really see this uptick in the weight management area. However, these drugs are effective. And that also comes with a caveat, because we know that even after stopping the drug, 1/3 of individuals actually regain their weight. We know that only 20 to 30% actually have significant weight loss that we would like to see that have demonstrable health outcomes. And so there's a lot of issues there. But in terms of the food opportunities, we know that they reduce their dietary intake by about 40%. So that's massive. One thing that scares me a lot is the fact that they lose that joy of food. So when we talked about longevity before, one of the things that we know, of course, is not just about the food, it's also about the enjoyment of food and sharing food. And so people on these drugs actually lose completely their desire to eat. And of course, that has an impact on the amount that they shop, but also what they shop for. And so that has really shifted in terms of the opportunities for food companies, ingredient companies, in terms of looking at the meal sizes, for example, so smaller formats. We're looking at nutrient density because, of course, now the nutrient intake is way down. Even if you look at the nutritional intake of obese individuals versus normal individuals, there's already a discrepancy of micronutrient deficiencies of vitamin A, vitamin D, potassium, and so they're already starting off with a nutrient gap. And now we are actually worse because now you're cutting down 40% of your nutrient intake, and which means fiber is becoming a problem. Protein is becoming a problem. Muscle mass up to 40% do these people experience. And so that is a massive, massive loss, which means, to Kate's point, is that bioavailability of protein, quality of protein, that kinetics of what gets taken in, how much gets taken in, because they cannot take a huge amount in at the same time. And so that also has a huge impact. And then, of course, 10 to 30% that start on the drug have massive digestive discomfort or upset, which means abdominal pain, nausea, constipation. That's where the gut health comes in again. So from all angles, if you think of whether it's format, whether it's nutrient composition, whether it's specific health goals, because some want to actually improve their metabolic status, whereas others actually are looking at improving their holistic weight. Yeah? And so there's that point. And then we also know that in terms of timing, most of these individuals by month 3 have suffered so much in terms of the side effects that only about 70% of them are still on the drug by month 3. And then by month 12, only about 40% are on them. So, and then another stat is that around 6% want to use the drug for long term, which means there's a huge opportunity for brands to really support and really have this health-focused or food-focused approach to design foods, because people actually want them. They actually want to lose the weight, but they also are looking at a longer picture of, I want to improve my health holistically.
And that's the kind of thing that you're working in the industry already today, right? To identify exactly what are those key trends and shifts. And the two of you, what is your take on the weight management drug, like risks and opportunity? Do you see, any major effects that comes to mind when you think of it?
Well, I'm not using it, but no, I think overall the trend for health is really asking for better nutrition. And I think that's a bit twofold, because on one hand it really goes to precision nutrition, where you really look like exactly what do you need, like which vitamin and which mineral, etc. But I think humans are really omnivores, and I think we need to be really careful that indeed we don't do undernutrition and that we really have complete nutrition. So I think it's very important that we have complete and very nutrient-dense sources of food, which is something that matches with us, so that's good. I think another two trends that are happening is that outside of the drugs, so people that don't want to do, to go to those measures, I think in snacks there's a very big trend to healthy snacks and high protein snacks and things like that. So I think that's also a good development, and I think there's a lot of opportunities also there to develop, both for ingredient companies as well as for consumer brands. And of course, with the whole awareness of what we eat, how it impacts ourselves, there's also this big trend of how it impacts the world. Mm-hmm. And I think, there the whole sustainability picture comes in, and I think we're really at a crucial time where we really see that the food that we produce, we don't produce it in a way that in a number of years we actually have a planet to sit on to eat that food. I think we need to take a step back and really rethink how we do that. So I think it's very good that there's also a drive from the market coming. I think it's very difficult to keep that drive once people enter the supermarket and then really need to buy products. But I think the awareness is there, and with that also, the companies producing the foods are really having more and more look at that, and the solutions are coming to the market for it. So I think that's also important coming with that.
Absolutely. Do you want to complement anything or jumping?
I mean, the only thing to add that hasn't been touched on, the real innovation, obviously, is the discovery of the hormone and the application or the utility of the hormone and how that's being mimicked and then turned into drug form. The idea of how hormones have a role in our overall health and in our bodies, and how that can be either mimicked, manipulated to enable healthy lifestyles, as well as what we consume, is fundamentally interesting. The world of AI applications to discovery, we have one investment, it's now a decade old, called Neuritas, out of Dublin and now in the US, that does peptide discovery using AI. They were doing that 9-10 years ago. Their progress, and we haven't touched on it, but how you work with corporates for adoption, mm-hmm. and how that sort of life cycle of a startup, what that looks like, how you get traction, et cetera, is part of the story as to how any of this goes to market, and a really important piece. There is incredible research, that is never quite unlocked, and IP that never sees commercial viability, and there are reasons for that. So I think that the interesting piece, an interesting story, is more at that end, and obviously that it's actually made it to market. But to the question of, what can food investors sort of leverage the pharma aspect of high margin, low value, there is a ton of money that went into that. Pharma is not exactly inexpensive to get to market, including timelines. So I think, not to oversimplify it, but it's a very long road and expensive road that got here, with incredible implications that are yet known. And though high protein snacking might be an outcome, it's not the most fascinating piece of it, I suppose.
Yeah, Kate, you're mentioning an interesting aspect before as well, and I think linking to what Ali just mentioned about, the trends of doing things at scale and get into a relevant level from an investment perspective. You referring to sustainability before, and one thing that I think we all seen in this space was the first generation of solutions where protein was replacing animal, and in itself, that was already a key feature. But it came with a lot of downsides, maybe, or at least less concern, so to say, with the quality or the health aspects of that kind of protein. So a lot of ultra-processed bacon or burgers, invaded the plant protein supermarkets like shelves, and of course, again, super interesting from a sustainability perspective, but maybe not yet responding to a One Health principle, where, to your points on what the quality of what is considered in the food, and at the same time protecting animals and protecting our environment and ecosystem. Do you think that right now that changed a little bit, that there is a new narrative around the alternatives that we are looking for in the protein space?
Yeah, I think there's really a number of generations going on. The first generation, indeed, plant-based alternatives, the sort of carton that was supposed to be a burger. So nutritional value was sort of there, but it didn't taste right and it cost a lot of money. So generation one, but someone needs to start somewhere, right? I think by now we're really in the plant-based ingredients. We're at generation two. Taste is much better. Price parity is much, much better. Sometimes they even achieve that it's cheaper, but you need a lot of ingredients to make it taste good, to make it taste that good. And you end up with very high processed products. So the nutritional value is still a problem, and with that, the consumer acceptance. The thing is, we've only been making alternatives with plant-based proteins, and they have those drawbacks. And what you see now is that there's more and more startups that actually are coming to the market and also getting, closer to the regulatory approval, so that you can work with new ingredients that bring more than just plant. But then, indeed, you come to the scalability effect. Because plant-based protein, it's available at a scale that you cannot imagine, and then as a new ingredient with a new way of producing, you need to be able to compete with that and to join in on that scale. And therefore, I think there's a lot of focus on new ingredients with new functionalities and new things, but as long as you cannot make it available at scale, sorry, but it's irrelevant. And I think if you look at, the dairy industry and the want to produce milk with fermentation, with precision fermentation, this is a commodity market that is half subsidized. So how are you going to compete with a high-tech technology with that? So, and I think that's something which is very important. There's been a lot of startups that have been focusing on products and on functionality. And I think what we now really need is companies that focus on process. How do we produce it? How do we make these components? And I think this is something that we're doing. So I think it's the good way. But I think that's something which is very essential and what we need to see more and more of.
Wonderful. Ali, I know that you've seen more and more of a lot of things because you've been in this space for a while. So tell me a bit more about what you're experiencing within food tech, what you've seen founders, try hard and fail. Is there, a common mistake that you've seen being repeated over and over again that maybe some potential founders here might escape after listening to your good advice?
I mean, as ever, know your economics, know your COGS at a small scale, and if the economics don't work at a small scale, they're relying on economies of scale is not an answer. Mostly or simplistically, for the sake of, even if every food and ag tech fund in Europe or globally wanted to back you, we don't have sufficient capital to do that, and it won't work for the end state in terms of consumer adoption. So I think there's been a reset, there's been a sobriety that's entered our category, but the utility of that sobriety is much more commercially sensitive plans. Any founder that we talked to today has been incredibly thoughtful, typically, with respect to how they're going to get to a revenue-generating place within the time frame of whatever fundraise we're talking about, or at least projecting that out with a lot of tire kicking. And the reason for that is simply a combination of what funding exists and how hard long won and then hard fought it is to get that funding. And in conjunction with that, the role of corporates or incumbents in being an enabler, whether that be with an LOI, with a pilot, with JDAs, to help some of the startups get at least some kind of traction or proof of concept. But also, if you're going to do that, there are timelines that need to be catered to with respect to how the corporate will move and how you navigate that. And so you can kind of think of within our world, there's either you have the choice of trying to do your own facility for which you're going to need substantial capex. There is leveraging somebody else's facility or partnering up with a CMO or a CDMO and using that playbook, in which case you need an offtake and someone to partner up for that funding. Or there's a licensing agreement, working with your corporate partners and selling into them, and all of them have pros and cons. And so I think any of the companies who have been in the category for the last few cycles, at least a decade in our case, have learned that, as have investors. And so thinking through, viable routes. We or I repeatedly at our firm talk about a children's story about a bear. It's called Going on a Bear Hunt. I'm Canadian, so apologies for the bear reference. But the bear and the family essentially are trying to get somewhere. And there are many hills in the way, and they can either go, sometimes they try to go over the hill, you can't get over the hill. You gotta go around the hill, you can't go around the hill. You gotta go through the hill, you can't go there. And so the idea being, I think our category has been through that. And to that end, there's been a lot of ingenuity and creativity with respect to finding a way. And finding other go-to-markets. Climate has a similar story of if your long-term market and the ideal state of the technology isn't accessible in the next 2 years, what is the short-term horizon in which to get some kind of commercial movement so that you can get to a sustainable business.
And can you highlight maybe one or two high success stories as well in that space, or companies that did it well?
No. Work in process.
Kate, how about you? Can you tell us a bit about some hard lessons learned with the journey of scaling the solution that you're working on today, and maybe if you want to tell about as well, just for the audience that doesn't entirely know how precision fermentation works and the role that it might take in the ecosystem, feel free to add that as well to the answer.
Yeah, I think, so what you do if you do a fermentation process, whether it's what we do biomass fermentation, so you use the microbes itself, or you do precision fermentation where you produce one specific molecule, like specific milk molecule. But if you want to do that, you need bioreactors. And that comes with a lot of capex. So you need to be smart about how you scale, because that costs money. And I think what we've been doing from the start is not immediately addressing the bulk big markets, but start rather from specialty products that have, it's a little bit less volume, bit more margins. So first go there, unlock that, and with that you can unlock the next scale, and then the next scale, and then the next scale. I think that's something that you see also other startups now pivoting to more and more, also in the alternative milk space. Instead of the bulk milk proteins, they go for the more special molecules that are in there that are difficult to find elsewhere. So I think that's one part that, don't go, to the bulk and compete with commodities immediately, but work your way to there, unlocking it step by step. I think then you can also, in the beginning, leverage contract manufacturers and partnerships, etc. But then at some point you come to another hurdle because you need to look at cost economics. And if you want to use the pharma CDMOs, you're not going to be cost competitive. You need to have invention in your process technology to be able to scale and be cost competitive. So at some point you really need to build your own facility, because otherwise you don't have your unit economics, right? And there's always the game play, like, okay, first you need to have your commitments from the markets before you can build it, but before they want to do the commitments, they want to know that you can build it, so it's always a chicken and the egg there. And then especially in the B2B ingredient space that we are in, there's incredibly long sales cycles, so 1.5 years is is normal. And it takes 2 years to have a facility. And once you go through the 1.5 years, they want to have the big volumes, otherwise they cannot use you. So you need to align this, but that also means that those offtake agreements come relatively late when you already need to be building your facility. So those are like the things that are difficult to get through. So you need to work with partners, with investors that understand this, that also understand the pressure that we have in our supply chains for ingredients. There's really big gaps coming that we need to address. So if you have something that is a solution, it's going to work. And then I haven't even talked about the geopolitics, which means that, you know, you need to be certain that you can produce your own food in your own region rather than getting it from across the planet. So, and I think, you know, maybe now it's a bit more difficult, but I think there will be even more and more support just because it's food. People need food, so it needs to be able to be made. So I think, I think the stress will come up and that will enable us even more.
I'll give you one example. There is a company called MyAlgae, which is a relatively recent investment of ours. And I think they're a good case insofar as they are not using pharma-grade bioreactors. They are using a lesser grade, therefore less expensive. It is their own facility. However, it is off the shelf so far as the way that the tech works, with slight edits that have been made. And for all of the companies that have been in microalgae space, and when we first met them, you know, there's a lot of scar tissue in the market within microalgae, and typically it's sort of say, oh my God, absolutely not. And the point of difference with this one was really that it had been built for purpose for an end market and an end economics. And so they're able to get to cost parity or below fish meal in this case, that they're making an alternative to DHA, which is an omega-3 and goes into salmon feed, for instance, in farming of salmon, which is a large contributor to food security, certainly in the developed world as well as elsewhere. And so in their context, they were able to do that from small scale production. So you increase that and you continue to get advantages. But it began from an economic viability standpoint, and a very strategic founder with respect to being very frugal, shoestring budget for about 7 years, and got to a very different place. And so it's a sort of a different generation of companies that we're seeing like that, and it's great to see.
Thanks for bringing in an example and also for sharing the journey, you know, and things that you should be careful of when you are planning on scaling a new solution within the food tech ecosystem. I still had a bunch of questions of my own, but I'll try to address some that the audience brought up here. And one of them is a little bit trying to project oneself into the future. You know, in the coming years, do you think that the world would ever be 100% plant-based or alt protein, or, you know, independent from animal protein, or not? And, you know, what else do you foresee in the future of food that might surprise maybe some folks here in the audience?
I'll start off. So I think that, of course, food will be personalized. Yeah. People will know what to eat, when to eat, and how to eat based on their unique biology. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that I don't think we will be completely vegetarian or vegan. I do not think so. I do think that we will eat less, but it will not completely be eliminated, or meat will not be completely eliminated from our food system. And also, I do think that with our new technologies, the food will be more locally relevant. So we'll have less waste, for example. People will know it will be grown locally based on the needs, the health needs of the local population, to be able to improve health. And so definitely, future will be more data-driven. It will be more integrated in terms of food, pharma, and the healthcare system. And I hope that it will be equitable and that healthy food will be available to everyone.
Well, I think we all hope for that. Do any of you want to compliment a little bit?
I also don't believe the whole world will go vegan. I think one aspect that we didn't touch upon that much is the cultural aspect of food. You know, we can sit here in Western Europe, in other places in the world, food is thought about very differently. Two things that I'm very enthusiastic, and hopeful for. So one of them is the acceptance of GMO. You see slight changes coming. It's tiny, but as a biotechnologist, I really, really encourage this. We do everything non-GMO because the market is not ready yet, but there's so much potential, and I think if we really need to feed all these people that are going to be on the globe, we will need it. So I'm really hopeful that we're going to accept it more. And secondly, I also think that in undernutrition, we can really make big steps. And I think single-cell protein, what we're doing, is one of the things that can really enable that, because it's a source that you can really easily enrich with important nutrients that you need to have. So I also hope, and that's really my personal long-term goal, that we can play a role in that to also really fight undernutrition with the geopolitics there, with all the climate changes and effect it's going to have on where we can live and where not. I think this is going to be a huge aspect as well, and I hope we can be part of the solution for that.
Oh,
yeah.
Wonderful. Definitely agree with the cultural aspect of food, and I think I'm happy to hear the more hopeful future, I think, for our food system. Ali, do you want to complement and maybe close the conversation as well on that?
I was hoping for a different question. I mean, I think that the culture point is a really important one. When we talk about food systems, I mean, you can't disaggregate the fact that, you know, personally, I don't want to live on a pill. That there's a way to have a perfect nutrition if you want it, but it kind of removes itself from the nature of connectivity and the role that food's played in our human history. So I wouldn't want that to go. I think there's obviously a tension between, you know, glorifying subsistence farming and a history whereby there's total self-reliance. We've had a very global food system. We have a very global food system. Geopolitics play into that, and that has its implications that aren't necessarily positive. I don't think you can, and part of, again, the conversation around regenerative agriculture or otherwise, the sustainable agriculture story is one which has a market layer to it. And I think you can't remove what is incentivized and what is not. Subsidies were mentioned. I think, Kate, you mentioned them with respect to milk. It's a complex problem to unpick. Obviously, the land of ideal is that, you know, diet-based ailments, chronic diseases, are not part of our future, and that's something that food can play a role in, but clearly there are other variables to take into account.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the three of you. I think it's definitely better now, after we finished this conversation, to think about, you know, what the food will look like in the future, hopefully indeed in the One Health area. Thank you so much for all of you. Do you want to please give a final round of applause for all of them? Thank you so much.